Well, Donald Trump says the US is close to reaching a long-term peace agreement with Iran. He said Iran has agreed to, quote, almost everything. Trump says the next round of US-Iran negotiations may happen over the weekend.
It's looking very good that we're going to make a deal with Iran, and it's going to be a good deal. It's going to be a deal with no nuclear weapons.
When is the next in-person round of negotiations on the war in Iran? When will
They're
that
all
take place?
important. I mean, it's not a question of Iran. All of them are
When
important.
will the next in-person
Probably,
meeting take
maybe
place?
over the weekend.
Well, we have two specialists to discuss the conflicts in the Middle East. Samir Puri is a visiting lecturer in war studies at King's College London, and Ali Akbar Dareini is a researcher at the Tehran-based think tank Centre for Strategic Studies. Thanks very much for being with us here on Al Jazeera once again. Samir, if I can begin with you. Trump once again saying very, very close to a deal. Potentially there'll be negotiations in the next 24, 48 hours. What chance do you think of that actually happening at this point?
One thing we've learned over the last just over a year is that Donald Trump is not a very good evaluator of peace deals. Russia, Ukraine, Thailand, Cambodia. I know this is obviously a totally different, separate conflict. Each war is unique. But he's obviously adding his enthusiasm to try to give extra momentum to the talks, which is a good thing. Clearly, that alongside the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire, these are good things. And one would hope that they add momentum. But the reality is that the gaps between Iran and the US on a series of critical issues mean that for the US to achieve what it wants in the peace talks probably means the Iranian government will feel that it is admitting defeat. And I'm not sure how the Iranian government will admit defeat, given the fact that they feel that they have effectively fought the US at least to a standstill in their interpretation of how this war has gone so far.
Ali, if we can bring you in now. What do you make of that? Obviously, Donald Trump is extremely optimistic, and we know the leadership in Tehran is not going to want to admit defeat, like Samir is pointing out.
When Trump speaks of an agreement with Iran or being close to a deal with Iran, you should be more worried that he may do something evil. Given Iran's past experience, there is absolutely no trust in the United States. But given the experience of the 40-day war, there is a possibility of Iran and the US going towards a framework agreement. If Trump returns to his America First policy, there is a possibility of a framework deal. If he insists on Israel First policy, no expectation of a deal. Iran is now in a stronger position. It has winning cards. The blockade is not going to work. Iran has ignored that blockade. But there is some possibility that Iran and the US may reach a framework deal, including Iran allowing some American non-military ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz in return for paying fees or security services. But we have to wait and see what the Americans' position will be.
Right, Samir, what would need to be involved in any sort of framework deal? Are we talking about the Iran's nuclear program in the Strait of Hormuz, which appear to still be the major sticking points between the two, right?
Yeah, I'm also following the logic as well in terms of how this might play out. And I would agree until the point of the US paying a toll to Iran. That, I think, is not going to happen. In terms of what sort of framework deal could emerge, I think because there are so many issues of contention between the US and Iran, the first thing is how many of those issues are actually in a framework deal. Does it include enrichment? Does it obviously include ship passage? Does it include a US role helping Israel in southern Lebanon? Does it include Hezbollah? Is it narrow or is it broad? And I think in the history of peacemaking, sometimes an excessively broad agenda in a framework agreement can spell very quick failure because there's just too many issues there. So I think there is also a question, and the Pakistanis will be dealing with this, right? They're grappling with this now. how wide is a putative deal in terms of the number of issues that it includes?
Ali, what would Iran actually be willing to shift or move? Not necessarily concede, but what could they be willing to negotiate on, do you think?
Iran has been open to negotiations, but given the fact that the Trump administration bombed the negotiating table twice, it has zero trust of the American side. But Iran's demands are very clear and legitimate. Iran wants its right to uranium enrichment be respected. It wants its frozen assets be released. It wants war compensation, and it wants the U.S. to recognize that Iran has the right to control the Strait of Hormuz. In return for allowing American ships to pass through the strait, non-military ships, I mean, and also giving some concessions on the nuclear issue, but no concessions on the missile program or its allies. Iran will not abandon its allies. Iran will never, ever give up its missile program, and it will not give up its right to uranium enrichment, but it may agree to some limitations on that.
Samir, given all of that, it feels like Donald Trump is really trying to force the issue here, really putting pressure on wanting to see progress. What is the risk of that happening? Because negotiations of this scale can sometimes take years to get an agreement.
Yes, and he's not a patient man. And he's also under huge domestic and global economic pressure to bring this war to a quick conclusion, more in line with the narrative he had for this war. There is every reason to believe that the Pakistani mediators are having to obviously accommodate the US sort of need to move very, very quickly, juxtaposed with Iran's very correct strategic assessment that it has a lot to gain by stringing things out. And it's fair enough that Dan Kane and Pete Hegseth said in the press conference in the last sort of day or two that the US can retain this blockade, the naval blockade, indefinitely, that it can retain the ability to resume offensive bombardment military operations at any stage. But can the US indefinitely retain its overwatch posture over Iran and the blockade? Or is there actually a ticking clock that the US needs to deliver a result in, and can Iran string the negotiations out? So that's also one very likely approach Iran might be taking with the talks.
Well, Ali, can you enlighten us a little bit more on that? Is that part of Tehran's tactics to try and string this out as long as possible, that it can withstand the US blockade or the so-called blockade of Hormuz?
First of all, the U.S. blockade is not going to last for long. Why? Because Iran has, winning cards. First, Iran has ignored the blockade. I have information saying that several Iranian ships passed the Strait of Hormuz and are on their destination without being stopped. If the Americans fire at the Iranian ships or confiscate them, Iran will confiscate and fire at American ships and those of their allies. And more important, Iran's ally Ansarullah in Yemen is on the verge of closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to hostile ships. And this will add another layer of pressure on the United States to back down and end its illegitimate blockade in the high seas. So Iran's policy has been to get the U.S. into a war of attrition. The U.S. wants a vertical war. Iran wants horizontal war. The U.S. goes for classical war with a very decisive victory in a short period of time. Iran goes for asymmetrical tactics covering a wide geographical region and turn it into a costly war. And Iranian strategy has won. The U.S. got stuck in a 40-day war and at the end demanding a ceasefire.
OK, we'll leave it there. But thank you so much, Samir Puri, visiting lecturer in war studies at King's College London, Ali Akbar Dareini, a researcher at the Centre for Strategic Studies in Tehran. Thanks again for joining us.